I stay in the area for a while to reflect and figure out what's next. I guess I want to be somewhere near where Jesus is. I just don't quite know what to say to him. What do I really want him to do or to say? Until I know, I'm just going to hang around, I guess. So, here I am, tagging along after Jesus and his band of merry men somewhere between northern Israel and southern Jordan. I hope Jesus doesn't think I'm stalking him. But if so, there are more than 100 other paparazzi whom I notice are also following at a distance. I guess we're all looking for some residual glory to fall on us, or something. One of them, a bearded man with a British accent, wearing sunglasses and a Panama hat with khaki shorts and hiking boots, strikes up a conversation with me. He is an archaeologist who has been in this region many times. I get the impression that he is near Jesus out of historical interest more than personal faith, but he is fascinating to listen to. I ask him how they knew where to dig to find an ancient city. He says the best place to look is on a hill. They call it a tell. And if you're looking for a place of worship, go to the very highest place on that hill. You build a city on a hill for the purposes of defense. And you build a place of worship at the top because, well, it's closest to heaven, I guess. Remember the Tower of Babel? It's easier to think about God on a mountaintop than it is in a valley, I suppose. The people of Israel are led by the Lord to inhabit the land of Canaan. Their first priority is to cleanse the land by ridding it of idols. And they are given strict orders not to learn the customs or take on the practices of the idolaters in that land. Of course, history tells us that they fail to remain pure in that regard. It seems that about every other king of Israel falls into idolatry, and with him, the people. Maybe he worships some of the local gods from the region, such as Baal or Molech. To do so, he has idols made, and he erects Asherah poles. He appoints priests to offer despicable sacrifices in these various high places. If the king is especially evil, he even introduces idol worship in the temple in Jerusalem itself. The next king who comes along might repent and bring the people back to the Lord. If so, he destroys all the high places, tears down all of the Asherah poles, gets rid of the false prophets and priests, reconsecrates the temple, and reintroduces the worship of the Lord that has been commanded. Then there are those kings who are, like myself, I confess, mostly good, but somewhat compromised. Solomon walks according to the statutes of his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burnt incense on the high places. Asa's heart is fully committed to the Lord all his life, although he does not remove the high places. I guess goodness is a relative term. I imagine if I were a king in Israel trying to reform the worship of my nation. It is probably a fairly simple matter to clean up worship in the temple right here in the city of Jerusalem, where I live. I can monitor the site, influence the priests, and deal directly with the people, leading by example and speech. It's much tougher to monitor every city in the domain, even tougher to find every spreading tree and private place of false worship, especially difficult to convince the people there to change what they have been doing for a generation or more and to come all the way to the capital city to worship. If I were such a king, how could I accomplish such radical reform? I certainly could cut off the support of any nationally funded priests in the outlying areas. I could pass a worship reform bill. But I must be careful. When a politician gets to messing with people's personal religion, it is controversial at best. At least as king, I don't have to run for re-election. But I do have to avoid assassination. What's tricky here is that all these Judean high places have not necessarily been set up by the national government. They might have been built by the local city council or by wealthy individuals. The site might be a sacred site left over from the Canaanites who had lived here for many generations. I can only imagine how politically incorrect it is to destroy an ancient holy site. So, between the challenge of finding all of the high places and then exerting my power and influence to change the local customs, override the local people, and destroy a popular religious site, complete worship reform is no task for a compromising peacemaker or a mostly good king. I would risk losing the loyalty of outlying areas by exerting politically unwise zeal. Better count the cost. We could have a civil war over this matter. How did these high places get built in the first place? I suppose they happened when folks don't hear from God for a while. Remember what happened to Israel in only 40 days? After all, it's quite a hassle and expense to travel all the way to Jerusalem. If I am an average Israelite, I grow up hearing tales in Hebrew school and the synagogue of what God did in the past. But I haven't seen any honest-to-goodness documented miracles in my day, and I don't know anyone else who has either. Besides, the things I pray for don't always get answered the way I want. But my neighbor tried praying a different way to a different God, and it seemed to work for him. It couldn't really hurt, right? I can still go to synagogue and keep the feasts and journey once a year and give my offerings there, but I make a little sacrifice, so to speak, for my daily needs. For daily prayer, I need to keep up with the Joneses. They have this slick new gas altar with electric start. I have high places today, more than I would like to think. I have a theological high place when I build my theology, starting with philosophy. In educational circles, we call it philosophy of religion. Symptoms, systematic theology, quoting men, comparing religions. I build an ecclesial high place when I start a church with a business model. In ministry circles, we call it leadership. Symptoms, flow charts and titles, programs and teams, budgets and business managers. I build an educational high place when I focus on credentials. Confusing education with credentials, I seek secular approval to certify my learning. Symptoms, accrediting associations, obtaining and touting degrees, receiving government approval. I build a kingdom high place when I build a church to and for seekers. In order not to offend them, we teach what might be called consensus theology, an inoffensive, Christless, bloodless gospel. Symptoms, avoiding the cross, catchy felt needs messages, decisions based on drawing crowds. I build a personal high place when I center my life around me. Hedonism or humanism, with or without Jesus, still begins and ultimately ends with me. Symptoms, worship songs that emphasize me more than Jesus, lack of generosity, a schedule that crowds out God. I build a liturgical high place when I plan worship starting with music or with emotions or even with a theme, so that worship becomes the musical manipulation of certain feelings or becomes creative teaching. Symptoms, rehearsed lighting cues, published themes, lack of silence, lack of prayer. Josiah is a rare king who is willing to pursue and purge the entire nation of its idolatry. His is a messy and costly job, and it involves actually killing a lot of people. But it cleanses the land, and it pleases the Lord. If God is not speaking to me right now, maybe it's because I have not been listening to the right God. I think I do what pleases Him, perhaps, but in truth, I have become just like the people around me. I am copying the world and haven't recognized it because all of my friends are doing the same. Am I willing to go to and destroy the local high places in these pockets of so-called Christian society today? Only when I have destroyed the high places can I truly have revival.